Hello, and thank you for joining me for Storytime with Mr. C. I am Mr. C, and if you have been here before, welcome back. If this is the first time you have tuned in, welcome to the show. If you like what you hear, please go check out my first 11 episodes. Here on Storytime with Mr. C, I will be sharing stories that I have written, or a friend or family member has written, or maybe even something you have written. If you would like for me to share one or more of your stories here on Storytime with Mr. C, get your story or stories ready to go and shoot me an email at storytimewithmisterc@gmail.com. I have put that email down in the description for you. For now, I'm going to ask that you please keep stories to a maximum of 2,000 words, and please keep these stories family-friendly for now. And maybe, just maybe, I will read some of your stories on future episodes. As always, gotta put that big shout out and thank you to my buddy Russ for helping me out with my intro music. Russ is the bassist for local band Drive By High Five. If you get the opportunity to check them out here in Tucson, please do. I have heard a rumor that they might be playing in Tombstone sometime in October. So, go look for them. See if you can find them. Also, big, huge thank you to Ben over at Chasing the Whimsy. You can find the link to his podcast down in the description. Please go check that out and show Ben some love. Thank you, Ben, as always, for your continued support, sir. For this, our 12th episode, I will be sharing the next chapter from my stories about my father. And after today, I only have one last story from Father Allen. That's right, today and next week are the final chapters. Then we will move on to a whole month of spooky stories for October, so prepare yourselves for that. And then in November, I will start sharing some of the stories written by some of the most powerful women I have ever known. After that, who knows? Either way, I would love some more material, folks, so start sending me some stuff. Shoot me an email. Let me share some of your stories, please. Also, please remember to let all your people know that along with my show appearing on Spotify, you can also find Storytime with Mr. C now on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music. So, go check that out. All right, folks, enough babbling. Here we go with episode 12. Stand by.
Storytime with Mr. C. Storytime.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of Storytime with Mr. C. This is the next chapter in my collection of stories I wrote about my father. This is Bikes with Motors, Part 2. Eat Your Heart Out, Evel Knievel, from Father Allen. My father's collection of motorized bikes was in a state of constant flux. Here one moment, gone the next. You never knew what you were going to find when you entered our backyard. It was almost organic in nature. I am certain I don't remember most of them, but there were a select few that stick in my mind. The Kawasaki that my sister could drive, but I could only ever ride on as a passenger. It was big and loud and looked like your stereotypical cool guy motorcycle, and was way too much for me to handle. This was the one I remember my father driving the most. We also had the Honda. It might have been a moped, but it was definitely yellow, and it had a large metal luggage rack that stuck out like a molded extension of the frame. This is where I would sit as a passenger, but the Honda was also one that I could actually drive by myself. And then there was the Yamaha QT50, otherwise known as the Yamahopper. This thing looked like a bicycle crossed with an insect. The shiny black frame was only slightly more robust than your average bicycle, and it had a big fat padded seat. Foot pegs stuck out from either side just below its boxy little motor, which wasn't much bigger than a toaster. Hand brakes just like a bicycle, but no gear levers. Cables and wires sprouted from the handlebars and wove their way down the frame. Rear view mirrors extended up and to either side. Didn't have a fairing or any other bulky cosmetic parts, but it did have a headlight and turn signals. And a sad little horn. I looked it up, and the moped was listed as having a maximum loading limit of 170 pounds. My father probably weighed twice that, but he would still perch on top of the poor little moped and scoot down the street. He looked like a big fluffy circus bear riding one of those impossibly tiny tricycles. But the Yamaha was perfect for me, lightweight and easy to maneuver. And the craziest thing about this particular motorized bike thing was that it was brand spanking new. My father hadn't haggled with someone at the swap meet or traded in a pile of fishing poles. He had purchased the brand new shiny moped from the dealer. And it was quite a shock to the entire family when he brought it home and added it to our fantastic collection of two-wheelers. One day, my father was out in our gravel driveway working on the yellow Honda. He had an array of tools laid out next to him, an oil-soaked rag or two, and his trusty fishing hat on top of his bald head. Sweat trickled down his face as he took things apart, put them back together, and occasionally discovered that he had magically acquired extra parts. He grumbled and cussed and frequently berated the lemon-colored motorbike. I watched from our kitchen door for a while, hoping I might glean some useful information. "Can I help?" I finally asked. My father did not answer, and he did not look up from his work, but instead kept tinkering away. I knew better than to ask again, but I shuffled out into the gravel and continued to observe from slightly less afar. "Here, hold this," he muttered. I scurried over and knelt next to him as he handed me a grease-covered part. I had no idea what it was, but I was very excited to be helping. "Hand me the Phillips," he said as he offered his empty right hand. I scanned the variety of tools to choose from, but quickly realized that I had no idea who Philip was. My father shook his hand to indicate that I needed to present this Philip guy post-haste. I grabbed a tool and shoved it into his waiting hand. It apparently was not Philip. He grumbled in disgust, snatched the part from my hand, grabbed a screwdriver, and returned to his project. I pouted as I sat and wondered why he hadn't just asked for a screwdriver. I knew what a screwdriver was. The brand new Yamaha was sitting nearby, so I crawled up and rested my scrawny butt on its big padded seat. My father immediately snapped his head around and looked at me over his shoulder. So I prepared to dismount the moped, but he just turned back to the Honda without a word. As the sun crept closer to the horizon and I was beginning to lose my battle with boredom, my father finally stood up and wiped his hands on one of his nasty shop rags. He tossed the rag aside along with his fishing hat and fired up the Honda. He climbed aboard, twisted the throttle several times, sending plumes of smoke from the exhaust pipe. "Stay here," he shouted over his shoulder as he rolled the Honda out of the gravel and onto the asphalt. He put the bike in gear and sped off down 15th Street. I watched him become smaller and smaller as he approached Wilmot Road, expecting him to turn around at any moment and race back to where I sat. Instead, he just kept going and eventually disappeared from view. I sat and waited, listening carefully for the sound of the Honda's engine. Eventually, I hopped off the moped and started kicking gravel, and I continued to kick gravel until I felt like I must have kicked all of the available gravel in our entire carport. It was getting darker by the moment, and still I waited. I was getting anxious, and my stomach was starting to growl. Where the heck was he? I knew I'd been ordered to wait, but it had been way too long now. I started to worry about what might have happened to my father. What if he had crashed and he was hurt somewhere? What if he drove really far away and then the Honda broke and now he couldn't get back? What if a snake got him? I returned to the Yamaha to sit back down and noticed the key was in the ignition. I knew how to start it. All you had to do was turn the key and then push the little button. Would I get in trouble if I went to rescue my own father? Certainly not if he was really in some kind of trouble. So I decided it was worth the risk. I turned the key, pushed the button, and the Yamaha purred to life. I rocked it forward to disengage the kickstand, turned the throttle, and slowly rolled into the street. I lifted my feet and rested them on the foot pegs as I picked up speed. I coasted past Mr. Michael's house and realized that it was getting pretty dark. As I rolled by Chris's house, I flipped on the fancy little headlight because safety first. As I approached the end of our street, where it intersected with Wilmot Road, I slowed down and guided the Yamaha into the dirt that ran alongside the street. I put my feet down and steadied the moped as cars and trucks sped past me on the busy road in front of me. If I wanted to keep going, I would have to navigate my way through those cars and trucks. The thought terrified me. I could feel the rushes of air push against me, and I was blinded by the occasional headlight as I watched the traffic race by. I considered my options and came up with a plan. I climbed off my noble steed, turned it to the left, and carefully walked the dirt path that ran parallel to Wilmot. After walking the length of one house and its backyard wall, I made another left and eased the Yamaha to a stop. I had made it safely into the alley that ran all the way down behind the houses on our street. Our house was down towards the far end of the darkened alleyway, the 11th house on the left by my count. Maybe my father had made it back home by now. Maybe he was somewhere in the dark of this alleyway, laying in the dirt, waiting for me to come save him. I climbed aboard once again and headed down the alley. The Yamaha's headlight bounced to and fro as I cruised along the rough dirt terrain of the alley, briefly illuminating trash cans and piles of debris. I grit my teeth and white-knuckled the handlebars, hoping that I would find my father sooner than later. I turned the throttle a bit more, and the moped bucked beneath me. This was taking way too long. I pushed the motorized beast ever closer to its maximum operating speed of 30 miles per hour. And then my rescue mission hit a snag. Or, more specifically, I hit something. Literally. At least that was one theory. Or the Yamaha got to bouncing around so badly I just lost control. The handlebars were ripped from my hands, and my body went one way while the Yamaha went another. I was airborne for at least a moment, and I sailed through the dark night sky until I came crashing back to Earth. I was sent violently sliding through the dirt, tumbling uncontrollably until I finally came to a stop. I barely had time to realize I was actually still alive when something heavy and made mostly of metal landed on top of me like a WWF wrestler. Once the dust had settled, I somehow crawled out from underneath the heavy thing, which was, of course, the brand-new shiny Yamaha, and I dragged myself to my feet. The wind had been knocked from my body, and I hacked and wheezed as I staggered around the fallen moped. I didn't know the extent of my injuries, but I was sure that it was bad. Bones were probably sticking out through my skin, and I was probably missing at least several teeth and an eye. As the sweet night air started to fill my lungs, I was able to begin a proper cry, and I definitely leaned into that. Tears and snot poured down my face as I cried and limped around the dark alleyway. Amazingly, the Yamaha's one little headlight had survived the crash, and it lit a narrow path through the dirt and dust. I stepped into the light and looked at my hands. The knuckles and palms of both were torn and bloody, but I didn't detect any jutting bones. I flexed my fingers, and while it hurt like hell, they didn't even seem to be broken. In fact, nothing seemed broken. Everything hurt, but I was still able to move and walk. I could not say the same for the Yamaha. I grabbed hold of the moped's handlebars and heaved it into an upright position. The headlight had been twisted, its beam now shooting at an awkward angle down and to the left. The handlebars were bent and both rear-view mirrors had been torn away. The big puffy seat was shredded, and one of the turn signals had been snapped off, but still dangled from its wires. The engine had stopped running, and worst of all, the key was broken off in the ignition. I pushed the start button, hoping it might sputter back to life, but the Yamaha remained silent. Not knowing what to do, I stood holding the injured moped and just cried for a while. Eventually, I decided that I needed to get myself home, so I started the slow, painful trek down the alley, dragging the Yamaha with me. It wasn't long before the moped became too cumbersome, and I was forced to leave it behind. I released the handlebars and let it fall to the ground as I continued to force myself to keep going. If I gave up now, they would never find me, and my bones would be consumed by the desert. After what seemed like 40 days and 40 nights, I collapsed against the chain-link fence that wrapped around our backyard, grabbed hold with both hands, and cried. I had finally made it home. Almost. The fence was 6 feet tall and locked. The sliding glass door that led to our living room was about 30 feet away, and I was in the dark. The drapes were open, and I could see into our living room, but there was no sign of my parents or my sister. I banged against the fence and howled, but my already feeble voice was further inhibited by snot, tears, pain, and sadness. I slid to the ground, defeated. There was absolutely no way that I was going to make it all the way to the end of the alley, around the corner, and back up the street to the front side of our house. I had failed in my attempts to rescue my father. Who knew where he was now? And I was going to die right here in our alley, leaning against the fence in the dark, alone, a mere 30 feet from our living room. As I lay whimpering, waiting for my life to flash before my eyes, I detected movement. I sat up straight as I saw my mom enter the living room, followed by her mom. Oh yeah, it was Sunday and Grandma was coming over for dinner. They smiled and laughed as they sat down on the couch. And then my father entered the room. He was alive. I had not failed him, but he did seem troubled. His brow furrowed as he gestured towards the front of the house, and then he turned and stormed back out. My mom suddenly looked much less cheerful as she shot up from the couch and followed after my father. I could hear the kitchen door fly open and my father's footsteps as he stepped out into the gravel of our carport. And then I heard his voice, loud and booming, as he shouted my name. "Back here!" I cried meekly from my position against the fence. He shouted again. I tried desperately to raise my voice. "I'm back here!" I hollered as I banged against the fence. Nothing happened. I dragged myself back to a standing position and threw my bloody hands against the fence again. Still nothing. Until I could see as my parents ran back into the living room and my mom wrenched open the sliding glass door. She ran out into the backyard yelling my name until she arrived on the other side of the fence. She wrapped her fingers through the links so that she could get to my bloody digits. "What are you doing back here?" she asked. "What happened?" All I could do was cry. I had been found, and I was no longer going to die in the alley. My father ambled through the yard as he fished through his keyring. He removed the padlock from the gate, and my mom hurried through to collect me. She helped me up to the back porch where Grandma was waiting, and the two of them hurried me into the bathroom. Once they got a good look at me, the questions came fast and frantic. All I could do was continue to cry, choke, and sputter as my mom and Grandma carefully peeled off my clothes and helped me into the bathtub. At some point, I was able to spit out the words moped and crash, and my father instantly appeared in the doorway as if summoned by these two words. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice full of anger. I spat out something about leaving it in the alley as I was cleaned up and patched up, and my father stormed out of the house. Once the matriarchs had put me back together, I shuffled out to the living room to find my father standing with his arms crossed. He looked me over and shook his head. I was a mess. I had basically suffered massive road rash on every single bony prominence of my body, and I was a bony boy. I had bandages on both of my knees, both elbows, shoulders, hips, most of my knuckles, the palms of my hands, my chin, my forehead, and my nose. Nothing was broken, and all of my teeth were still intact, but I had a lot of healing to do. My father grunted and left the house, probably to go drown his sorrows. He was pissed, and rightly so. I had done a very thorough job of ruining his brand new toy. But I didn't really see what the big deal was. At least now it fit in much better with all of our other motorized bike things. It was officially a piece of broken crap. Once again, thank you so much for joining me for this 12th episode of Storytime with Mr. C. That was Bikes with Motors, Part 2. Eat your heart out, Evel Knievel, from Father Allen, my collection of stories about my father. I will be reading you the next and final story from Father Allen next week, and that will be available on Sunday, the 28th of September. In the meantime, send me some new material, please, and go check out Ben's podcast, Chasing the Whimsy. Thanks again for hanging out and listening to my story. Hope you come on back for the next one. Until then, take care. Be safe.